Today I'm talking with Simon Heath. Simon's been a school teacher, principal, and held various other roles within education for nearly 40 years. He's passionate about promoting sustainability, strong leadership, and excellence within schools. He also founded and set up the Mistletoe Bay Trust, an outdoor education paradise in the heart of the Marlborough Sounds. I hope you enjoy this discussion, and if you did, please take the time to like and subscribe to the channel. It makes a huge difference. Thanks. So I just wanted to start off, have a brief talk about your two sabbaticals that you went on in 2012 and 2019, I think.
Yeah.
And you visited and probably compared a lot of schools, and was it the UK, Singapore, Melbourne?
Yep, that was 2019 was Singapore, Melbourne, and New Zealand. 2012 was United States, and then into the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and you also did a lot of New Zealand schools as part of that process. How did the New Zealand education system compare to those other countries, and the learning outcomes for students? How do we stack up?
It's a tricky one. Like in 2012, I was sort of looking more, not so much at the system, just at what different schools were doing, particularly in the environmental space. Even though you can't help but when you walk into a school as a principal, you look at everything. Like you don't just say, "Oh, I'm looking at the environmental stuff." You do. I think there was a lot of similarities between us and the UK in particular. The United States are very book-oriented, like very text-oriented in terms of the way they teach.
Yep.
They've got a textbook and they follow the textbook type of thing. Although, having said that, there's some pretty creative stuff going on there as well. Mm. In the UK, it's a very similar system to us. So it's hard to say whether they are better or worse than us. I think that we're, back in 2012, I would say we were very similar. doing good things, but in different ways. Mm-hmm. I think 2012 we were right into things like national standards and starting to get to grips with how that could impact on teaching and learning and student outcomes. In the UK, they sort of have their testing regime where they test students.
They're more like we were 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah, we've never really had a mandated testing. Particularly in primary, until you go back to like when I was at school, when you had those standards tests, Standard 1, Standard 2, Standard 3, and Standard 4. That's why they were called standards.
It's interesting because there's a guy that I follow a little bit on social media, Ben Fogel, I think. He's an outdoor adventurist, and he had a post recently from the UK about when are we going to move from our exam-based criteria, because there's plenty of kids that are super smart that just can't do exams.
Yeah. I mean, I'd put myself down as one of those. I mean, I was never a great, exam sitter, but if I had sort of a brief, an assignment, a project to do, and research to do, and talk to people and all that, then I could really thrive. But if I meant I had to draw on all that information and knowledge that I'd learnt through a year and then put it into a test environment and do something, do well over 3 hours, I didn't do terribly well in those situations.
And that's just not a realistic portrayal of normal life anyway, is it?
No, not really, no.
From the notes from your 2019 sabbatical, you wrote that, "I visited a lot of schools and principals in New Zealand and came away in awe of the passion, care and innovative practices that I observed and was so generously shared with me. Number 8 wire mentality is so very evident in New Zealand school leadership."
Yeah.
What do you mean by the number 8 wire mentality?
Oh, I think what New Zealand, like, we've got some pretty amazing leaders in this country in schools, like, really have. I mean, and the exceptional leaders are the ones that just grab every opportunity that's coming at them. They adapt, they modify to make it fit the context of their school, the nature of the kids that are walking in their school gate, the quality and passions of the teachers that they have, and they combine all that, and that's what creates the magic. Magic within the school, magic within the classroom, magic within the opportunities that that are then created for kids.
So it's not being fixed down one track; it's moving as times and events change.
Just grabbing hold of simple learning opportunities and turning them to amazing sort of life-changing experiences for kids.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, most of that happens inside the four walls of a classroom, but some of it also happens outside of that too, when they take it from that sort of theoretical process within the classroom about learning and studying and so on, and then going out and tasting it in a practical way, whether that be through, outdoor education, a camp of some sort, focusing on the work that they've been doing, or presentations that they might give as a result of their learning, or just the process of getting more information because you've created that thirst within the kids to actually get more, find out more, know more, be able to question more, challenge more, that sort of stuff.
So it's way more than following the standard curriculum and teaching what needs to be taught. It's sort of a holistic approach to learning from...
Yeah, absolutely. That keeping it relevant. Like where a lot of our students today turn off is they don't see the relevance of that.
Yeah.
So therefore,
and that's where so many people kick into life, is when they realise they enjoy something and all of a sudden the learning's relevant, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. But also, like having some goals. Like if there's nothing to aim for, then it's sort of like mundane. I'm doing it. It's like a drill. But if the work they're doing is focused on some sort of bigger outcome, like at the end of this, you're going to be presenting this to this group of people, or you're going to be, going on, organising an experience, or you're going to be something that they're working towards. And often the most powerful work is not done like in that isolated space. It's when groups of students work together, so that they actually have to learn to work together, solve problems, listen to each other's thoughts and opinions about different things, agreeing and disagreeing, setting their own timeframes and deadlines, not meeting those timeframes and deadlines, and therefore what's the accountability for that? How do they manage that?
So it's basically mirroring what's going to happen when they leave
school.
They leave
school, So I've always liked to think of the classroom more as it's definitely a learning space, but sort of like the office. Because if you think of it as a classroom and kids sitting in rows listening to the teacher, well, then we've got it wrong. Yeah. It's about being a really interactive space, nice and safe, where kids can make lots of mistakes, challenge each other, and feel comfortable in those spaces. And teachers being able to just quietly manoeuvre around and manipulate what's happening in subtle ways, so that all of a sudden they realise that the student's ready for this, so they just quietly put another challenge in front of them, or have that conversation with them.
I mean, that to me sounds like an amazing approach to teaching, and it's completely not what I got at school, and probably most of us. Are a lot of teachers in schools following this approach, or are there still a lot of old school mentality out there?
Yeah, no, look, teachers are genuinely trying to, take a sort of more holistic approach to the way they do their teaching. They, do some amazing stuff, which culminates again in, kids doing things that they never thought they could actually do or achieve. But then there's a whole lot of other stuff that gets in the way, So, there's a lot of additional work that a teacher does today that when I started teaching, you never had to do. Yeah. And
compliance type work.
Compliance stuff. There's more. I guess there's more assessment. Teachers tend to manage it pretty well, but there is more assessment. There is more There's much more accountability, and there's a lot of noise out there. Teachers aren't as respected today as they were 30, 40 years ago. Just no way. And I thought, Tomorrow Schools has been great. In New Zealand, Tomorrow Schools has been great. I mean, I'm a product in a way, of opportunities that I, grabbed hold of under Tomorrow Schools, which I would not have got under the old system. But having said that, I don't think Tomorrow Schools has been good for our kids. And it's been good for our teachers on one hand and not good for our teachers on another.
Okay.
And that whole level of how teachers are held within the community is totally different. And therefore the conversations that happen in homes are totally different to what they were when we were kids. And that can be great on one hand, or it can be not so great. If you haven't got the hearts and minds of the parents supporting the teacher, supporting the principal, supporting the school, and those conversations are happening around the dinner table every night, then that child is disengaged before they leave home in the morning to go to school. So to engage that child is a massive mountain for any teacher to climb.
Yeah.
And that's the reality today. Whereas when I was a kid, I was sort of told, you go to school, you learn, and you do what you're told. But that's not what happens today.
No,
that's and doing what you're told is sort of one thing, but that doesn't happen today.
Yeah.
So there's still a place for, if we look at teaching, there's still a place for the teacher being the teacher. Like we talk, there's a lot of talk about student agency and students owning their learning, owning this, owning that. But they also need the security and the safety that a teacher provides by being the boss in that space. And that's what teachers are important. They are the boss. They are the facilitator of learning. But sometimes there's a need for direct teaching and very, to help, help their students get the skills that they need to be able to move on with their learning. Otherwise the gaps start to occur.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a balance of how far do you go on both ways.
Yeah.
So you came back in 2019 from your trip, and not long after that, COVID hit, which was probably the biggest single disruption to learning
certainly in my career
we've ever seen for a long time. What was the experience for students during those couple of years of COVID? Was it negative? I'm assuming it was, but how negative was it for the students' ability to learn and meet grades and pass exams? And
I guess in the first part, it was sort of like a novelty, overnight, within 24 hours, we shifted, in our school, we shifted from being face-to-face to online within 24 hours, like unbelievable.
Renwick School.
Yeah. And pretty much the country did that.
And being unprepared for that.
Totally.
You didn't have months to practice.
No. I mean, I think within that 24 hours, I was signing up to a Zoom contract and enabled every staff member to have access to that so that we were able to, be online and at least see our students face-to-face, even if it wasn't, in the same room. And look, I have nothing but admiration for the staff that I was responsible for at Renwick and how they conducted themselves in making that happen, and pretty much the whole country, and I guess, when you think about it, the planet was, the whole world was in that space. In terms of student achievement, given it was a real novelty, there was I think there was a lot of creativity started to unfold with different teachers. I had different teachers making contact with me. Could I do a short video on, to challenge their class or challenge their group of students that might have been in the area of the school, like year 1 and 2s or whatever. So I found myself out in the backyard doing physical education type activities and then challenging students to do them themselves.
As a principal.
Yeah. And then I'd upload the video.
Cool.
And I saw other principals taking music lessons, playing their guitars and just engaging with their students.
Which I'm sure is really important, because it would be so easy for a principal just to not be seen for 2 years.
Correct, yeah.
And
well, you could disappear. Yeah, absolutely. But it was what was really critical, and what I think our teachers did extremely well, was be in contact with their kids every day, with their classes, every single day. And so doing that, they were also in contact with families like mums and dads, which meant that all of a sudden, over that 10-week period of that first lockdown, a really strong engagement occurred. And I think the playing field shifted a little bit. Yeah, parents really appreciated what teachers were doing, and teachers really appreciated what parents had to do in their homes to support their children in their learning.
That's interesting.
So we saw some really powerful learning opportunities that parents drove with the support of their teachers.
None of which you would get in the normal school environment.
No. Yeah. So that was really cool. But of course, by the time you got to the second and third lockdown, then there was a little bit of what's the word? We're getting a bit tired of that. Fatigue,
apathy maybe.
A bit of fatigue. Oh, here we go again. I really want to be at school.
Because you haven't got the social side of it.
Yeah, the social side. We can never underestimate what students get from being in a school setting. And I mean, not everything in a school setting is perfect. We know that. We've got our bullying issues in this country and all the rest of it. But the social thirst of students is pretty significant. So when we did come back together afterwards, it was like homecoming, like it was amazing. And mums and dads the same, coming in the school gate. And we just put on a massive barbecue that day, no cost to anyone because everyone had gone through enough. We just kept cooking sausages till no one could eat one anymore. When they came in the gate first thing in the morning, and before school started, it was just awesome. It was just great to see everybody.
I bet the kids were so excited.
Oh yeah, it was excitement. It was great.
So I'm sure you all learned a lot in that period. If we went into lockdown again tomorrow, would you do it different? Have you learnt a certain amount that you would restructure the whole online learning process, or was it quite refined by the end?
Yeah, look, teachers got really good at it. Having said that, it still presents challenges. And if we were to go into lockdown tomorrow, actually, I'd be quite concerned about that. I mean, not because of the health implications of being in lockdown, but I'm working with another college right now where they've been in not lockdown, but they've been in online learning for all of term one pretty much, and that has been really tricky. Because this is like basically their fourth time, I guess, in 3 years. And, that's just a real demand. There are times when you just need your teacher to be able to say, no, that's not right, or you're on the right track, keep going, and be there constantly supporting. And that can't happen easily in that online environment. And you're requiring everything to come together, mum and dad to be able to support the child having that engagement and wanting to learn, and the teacher having that access to be able to do that. All of those things have now eroded a bit because, as I say, in that first one, it was a novelty, 10 weeks, we'd never experienced anything like it, so people got in behind it. But now, whilst teachers would do their stuff, there's no question in my mind they would strut their stuff, they would find new and interesting ways to engage. It would be a much more demanding exercise. Yeah. There's nothing like being, in school. Yeah.
I think you've been in the education industry or an educator for nearly 40 years now. Would that be right?
I know.
Do you want to just give a very brief overview of where you've taught and been a principal of?
Yeah. Well, look, funnily enough, like I was born and bred in Blenheim, right? And so I spent the first 10 years of my life here, and then we, as a family, moved to Christchurch. And so I did my secondary and tertiary education in Christchurch. And when I graduated from Christchurch Teachers College in 1981, I was in those days you were bonded. So when you went into Teachers College, you were bonded.
To
who? Basically to the
ministry.
What we'd now call the ministry, but what was then called the Department of Education.
Because your teaching was free.
Yeah, well, we got my training was free, and we also we got an allowance, a fortnightly allowance, which I had a part-time job, but we could live on it pretty much. So we're very fortunate. So you were bonded for 3 years after graduation. So that meant that the department posted you. You didn't get. Right. You got a bit of a choice. You could choose your region, and then they would just post you to a school. So I was posted to the Wellington region and to Pākehā Intermediate.
Okay.
So I did my first 3 years of teaching at Pākehā, and then did a fourth year at Pākehā as a year 8 teacher, Form 2 teacher in those days. I did 3 years as a Form 2 teacher, and then 1 year as a Form 1, Year 7. And then I won my first permanent teaching position in Timaru.
Okay.
So I went down to Timaru in 1986 to a school called Grant Lee School, a full primary down there, teaching Form 1. And I did 4 terms there, so 3-term year back then. So 3-term first year, then term 1 of the following year, and then I left teaching. I resigned.
Why?
Well, I didn't resign in the end. I wrote to the education department and said, look, I'm totally unhappy in this place, because they affect if, you know, and sort of requested if they didn't grant me a year's leave, I would accept my resignation. I was just so unhappy in that school.
The particular school or
that
education?
School, well, no, not so much. No, I love teaching, but the principal of the school,
right,
I found incredibly difficult to work with. Having come from a big school where, you know, there was a huge amount of support, going into a smaller school with only 6 classes, and it just didn't work.
So what did you do then?
I went and sold insurance for AMP, and was tremendously good for the first 2 months, and then after that I wasn't so keen.
Yeah.
But they paid me a retainer, and so I did enough work to earn my retainer. And in the October of '87, just around the crash, actually, just after the crash, I applied for and won a position at Chisnall Intermediate in Christchurch.
Yep.
To take it up in the following year in '88. So my wife and I, we moved to Christchurch, and so I did 2 years. And like Chisnall Intermediate was like this. As soon as I started, I knew this is what I want to be doing again. You know, I really missed my teaching. So I absolutely loved it there. Did 2 years and a term there at Chisnall Intermediate, and won my first deputy principal's position
at Chisnall.
No, at Addington School, just at the turn of Tomorrow's School. So Tomorrow's Schools came in they were announced in 1989, 1990, I started as DP at term 2 at Addington School.
Yep.
And did 2 years in a term there with Dave Ching as principal. And then Pākehā Intermediate DP position came up, which was a bigger grading. And I thought, should I apply for that? And I said to Jan, my wife, you know, look, if we go to Blenheim, we'll just go for 3 years, and then we'll come back to Christchurch. I'll look for a principal's job. So she said, okay, because our 2 children were just like 6 months.
Did she believe you?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Probably not. And we came back because her family were here, and it was kind of nice to do that. So I won the DP job at Pākehā and came back to Blenheim in 1992. And it was sort of like, for me, it was a pattern of 2 years and a term, because I did 2 years and a term at Chisnallwood, 2 years and a term at Addington, 2 years and a term at Pākehā, and I won my first principal's position, and that was at at Fairhall School.
Yep.
Here in Blenheim. And I thought, well, that'll be a good step. We were going to go to Christchurch, but this is a good step, nice school. So I thought I'll do 3 years here, maybe 4 or 5. Ended up doing 14. Yeah, loved it. Just loved it. And because my children started there, it was easy to stay.
You love being a principal?
It was hard for a start, really hard for a start, because, you know, you're coming into a school which has had a principal there for 12 years, who, you know, that was his staff when I first arrived. And it took a wee while to actually help everybody to understand actually there's a change here. And things are going to change over time, and you know, I'm different, and so things are going to happen a bit differently. And once we got going, you know, 14 years later, I could still be there. To be honest, I could still be there. I loved every minute of it. Yeah, really did. And Fairhall was a school and community that embraced sort of opportunities. You know, that, I mean, you didn't just say, oh, we're going to go and do this. You still had to work with everybody and explain it and stuff. But if they understood it and thought, yes, let's do it, then they were right behind you. And, you know, I loved every minute of it there. We did some really cool stuff.
Then from there you went to Renwick.
Into Renwick, yeah. So 2008, yeah, I won the job at Renwick. Started in term 2, and that's where I finished at the end of 2020. So I did 13 years there as principal, and that was, you know, an amazing school too. I mean, I was sort of lucky enough to. It was just over 300 students when I arrived, and, you know, significantly about 100 students bigger than Fairhall. And I can remember walking in thinking, this is a lot of kids and a lot of staff, you know. But, you know, who would have thought, you know, 3-4 years later, we were well over 500 kids. And I think at that point we'd built about another 4-6 new classrooms. Things were really shifting, and so fast. And Renwick was growing as a little, you know, as a town, if you like. And I used to say to anyone in Blenheim, well, yeah, Blenheim's 10 kilometres from Renwick. You know, people say, or sort of say that Renwick's the hub here, not Blenheim. But yeah, it was a cool time. I loved every minute at Renwick. Yeah.
And our kids went to Renwick just before you started, from memory. And I do remember the change in the school over the years. It just became something quite amazing, and I want to have a wee talk about that later on.
Yeah.
In the research and reading I've done about you, it's scary these days. You can find out a lot about people online. But a few things that it appears that you're passionate about in education would be eco-learning and sustainability. Correct me if any of these are wrong. Striving for excellence, promoting strong leadership skills, and e-learning, potentially. Would they be correct?
Yeah, I think in terms of e-learning, I wouldn't say I was an expert, but I felt that we need to keep up. Like if you allow yourself just to sort of put your head in the sand, then the technology moves so fast, you can find yourself a long, long way behind. And so, you know, I wouldn't say I'm a techno geek by any stretch of the imagination at all, but if we want to make sure that our kids and our staff are competitive, you know, and have that edge, then we've got to keep pace with what's happening around us. And so at Renwick in particularly, I felt that there was a massive responsibility on us, given we were the biggest school in Marlborough, biggest primary school in Marlborough by a long stretch. And so there, you know, three big schools in Blenheim, the 2 colleges in Renwick. Then I felt that we needed to show some leadership as well in that space. So you know, back in 2015, after spending huge amounts of money, like we were budgeting over $70,000 a year for IT in the school to support e-learning and teacher capability around that. But that was an unsustainable cost to us, because each year we were also probably, in terms of, you know, laptops that we wanted available to our students, so many of them were getting damaged beyond repair. So that cost us kept going up. And it wasn't the most popular decision I've ever made, but I think it actually, in the end, was understood and accepted by parents, was that we had to pass some cost on, and that cost would be two parents, and that cost was the price of a laptop.
Yeah. So what does e-learning mean? It means using a laptop, using computers. Using
the tools of, you know, the sort of electronic tools to support learning.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want kids in front of screens when they come to school. From the moment they come to school to the moment they leave, that's not a healthy learning space. But we want them, just like a builder has all the tools to be able to go and build a house or do the construction stuff, then we need to make sure our students have all the tools that enable them to learn their best and achieve their excellence, whatever that looks like. And that doesn't mean they've got to be on a computer every second of the day. But the tools are there, and the software is loaded on there that's going to enable that, just as much as here's the large sheets of paper, here's the pens to brainstorm your ideas and throw them up on the wall so we can actually, you know, talk about that and question that. So yeah, that's the way I see it.
So you were lead principal for the Marlborough e-learning project?
Right back early in the early days, when I was still at Fairhall, we had a project called Project ICT, and I was chair of that group formed within the Marlborough Principals Association. And at that time, the big issue was getting equipment into schools. The cost was so great and the ministry wasn't helping. So we raised $400,000 and invested that into all schools in Marlborough. So it didn't mean everyone got flooded with IT gear, but they got gear that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And but not only did we put laptops and computers and so on into schools across Marlborough, we also raised money and for 2 years put a sort of an IT expert on the road to go around every school and just support teachers to actually come to grips with the technology that they had at their fingertips and help them use it effectively.
Yeah.
And whilst, and I roll the clock back like to the early 2000s, you can think, look, for some teachers it was like, how do you turn this thing on?
It's a long time ago in terms of technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
These days you probably almost don't need any projects because kids are just brought up with it from day one.
Yeah, so. They know. And so now it's actually channeling rather than giving stuff to.
Yeah.
What students can now do on a phone that mum and dad have bought them, the phones are powerful, and so it's channeling them and educating them into safe use.
Yep.
And being critical of what they're reading so that they don't just accept everything that they read or hear via electronic media.
Which brings up an interesting point, and I think when we had a beer a couple of weeks ago, we touched on this briefly, is AI, which has all come to the light and a lot more in the last few months. What do you think about the dangers of AI in education? You can go on to Bing now and writes you an essay that really it's pretty hard. You can't tell who it was written by.
Yeah.
How are we going to deal with this? Is it bad? Because just to go back a step, I distinctly remember being in a maths class once and the teacher saying, you need to learn how to do sums and equations because you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket all the time.
Yeah.
Well, that changed.
Yeah.
And now you can get away without knowing how to do sums and equations pretty easily. Is this just moving on? Maybe kids don't need to learn how to write because you're always going to have AI with us now.
Do it for you.
I don't think that's the answer, but...
No. Look, there are some basic skills that everyone needs. I can remember someone telling me that, students won't need a pen in, so many years' time. And, I must admit, I still use a pen. I still write lists. I need to sign my name and do all those sorts of things. To me, being able to manipulate a pen, pencil, whatever, is a really important skill. It's connecting the head with the hand to be able to communicate or do things, right? And it's fine motor skills. AI, yes, we can sit and we can tell Siri, send this text message, make this phone call and do all that, and that's fine. And I think, yes, again, we come back to students knowing, or kids knowing, that these are the tools that are available to them. But I'm not sure, and I'm certainly not sure, not convinced that we should just drop everything and go that way. It's like everything. There's got to be a balance, everything in moderation. And I think if nothing else, that's probably the really key job of a teacher, because schools and teachers, they are the balance point, or they should be, because you've got, let's say in a community like Renwick, you've got 500 students, 550 students, 400 families, all with different sets of values. The school has to plant itself very carefully in a balance point of all of that. Otherwise, you'll get offside with large sections of your community because of the values that and beliefs that you're espousing. So it's like it's the Goldilocks thing, isn't it? Not too much, not too hot, but not too cold. IT, not too much, but not too little, because you need. And so I think this is the one thing that central government has got to be really mindful of. The various ministries have to be very mindful of. every teacher, every principal, every board of trustees, and the way that they govern and lead education in their schools has to be really mindful of. Do not swing too far out.
Which is pretty difficult in today's society, because we're a society of extremes and opinions that we don't like changing.
I know. I mean, I know some schools, all the students walk in the gate and their mobile phones are locked away for the day. And that's okay. It's working. I guess it works for them. But are we in fact taking away? I mean, yes, we're taking away a tool, because a lot of the kids are on Instagram and they're looking, how many likes have I had? And so there's issues around that. Like we've got these students who are constantly looking for their likes. And they don't get the likes they think they need, then they feel depressed and sad and all the rest of it. And we've got to sort of teach them that it actually doesn't mean much. That's just. But I mean, it's not something I've ever really worried about, because I'm not interested in getting likes, because I'm not on any of those platforms. So schools can't be the default for mum and dad either. So there's this balance point again. Mums and dads can't expect too much of schools when they've got to do their job as a parent, and teachers have got to do their job as a teacher, and principals have got to do their job as principals and leaders of instruction and in the schools. But it's getting trickier and trickier every day. Every single day. It's a tough place in our schools in this country right now for a whole bunch of reasons. We've got amazing kids in New Zealand, and we have amazing teachers and amazing principals and amazing communities to support them. But it only takes the few to upset all of that. And we all know there's lots of those few out there in every school, whether they be a child in the classroom who causes a huge amount of upset and chaos, and that happens, whether there's a family in the community doing the same. It makes it a really tough space.
I'd like to touch on that a little bit later on too. Moving on to eco learning or eco education. I think as part of your 2012 sabbatical, you studied some eco schools in the UK. So what's an eco school? What's eco learning, and why is it important?
Well, in UK they have what they call Eco Schools UK, and when I was there, just off the top of my head, I think it was like 70% of all the schools in the UK were signed up to Eco Schools or Eco Schools. And believe it or not, the hub of Eco Schools in the UK is in Wigan. Everyone, I was quite surprised. Everyone I said to, I'm going to Wigan. They said, what are you going to Wigan for? Because that's where anything to do with Eco Schools happens. That's the hub. And so going into Wigan, I got to see a whole lot of amazing things. I visited about 4 different schools in Wigan. Can't remember all their names. Met with the council in Wigan, who were very proud, because councils oversee schools in the UK. So I got to meet with the council, who were very proud of the projects that they run around Wigan. And they had things like what they called Wigan and Bloom, Wigan Clean Up. You might remember some of these things. When I came back, we had Renwick Clean Up. And I don't know if we ever had Renwick and Bloom, but we certainly had our pet day, so we had our Bloom day. But it really opened my eyes how a council leading school, it's a really interesting way of doing it. Councils who have such an input into schools, they still have their boards and things, could really impact on a town or on a city, on a small city. And this is happening, really good pockets of this right across the UK. So eco schools, they sign up, and basically they have a really strong eco program that they run and under eco. So fundamentals like that's not news to anyone, like recycling in a really focused way, not just, oh yes, we recycle here. No, we recycle not just in the way we use and dispose. We're already thinking about that before we purchase. So we're not buying stuff that we're actually know we're going to have to recycle. We're buying stuff that we're going to use. So they are able to put pressure on the
suppliers.
The suppliers, to say, well, actually, we don't want this plastic coming from you.
Which seems to be a much overlooked part of the
It is. Like you go into supermarkets. Imagine in New Zealand, if everyone refused to buy anything that was wrapped in plastic.
Or chicken that had plastic base.
All of that stuff. So, so that we remove that, we apply that sort of pressure. Like consumers have an enormous amount of clout. But unfortunately, we're not, I guess, motivated or activated, or, there's not a call to action around that to change things. But if I took a micro example in Wigan, the impact of students on their communities, where they take over and look after like their sort of like suburb park. So one example of that, and I can't remember the name of the area, but there was a park about the size of Seymour Square here in Blenheim. And the community around it were saying, well, the council never get here often enough to mow the grass and trim the trees and look after the gardens. So the students from the local school said, well, why don't we collectively do that and take that off the council? That. And then so they put a case together, went to the council and said, how much does it cost you to mow, look after the gardens, trim the trees and all the rest of it? What's your budget each year to do that for this particular park? And, I'll grab a number out of there. They say it was £10,000. So they said, well, for £8,000, would you be prepared to have that off your hands and we look after it as a community? And so the council agreed to on a pilot basis. So this, I got there about 3 or 4 years afterwards. This community had not only looked after it and developed it. They had their own ride-on mower. They had a shed there where the ride-on mower was kept. They had a service contract with someone to look after everything that worked.
And all facilitated by the students.
All facilitated by the students and the community around it.
So they're learning so much, aren't they?
Yeah, and the park was a bowling green in terms of the grass. The gardens were manicured. It was beautifully cared for. It was a great example. And then you saw that scaffolding into other areas, like people taking real pride in their street frontages of their homes and their properties. So the lawns were like, cut, they were just beautiful. And
what a brilliant
gardens. So it just blew out from there. And when I came back, I actually met with Alistair Simon. I said, look, as he was mayor at the time, I said, look, we could do this, here in Marlborough. Let's be, a town that actually thinks differently about how we look after our public spaces. But then you got onto things like Lansdowne Park, and our parks are a lot bigger. It didn't grow any legs here, but I still think there's an opportunity for that sort of thing.
One initiative which maybe you can talk about was the installation of solar at Renwick School. Was that purely to save money, or were there learning opportunities for the students right through the whole project?
Yeah, there's a real example. I think it was an example. Yes, it would help save money. Yes, it had other positive impacts because of the money that we saved. But it was a huge learning. It was part of all of the learning that we were doing. When I came back from that 2012 visit, we identified a number of projects, and solar was definitely one of them. But we had to go and raise the money, so because it wasn't cheap. But you might remember the fundraisers we ran over 2 years called Positive Energy.
No,
you might not remember
really.
those. 2014 and 2015. So we ran this project, fundraiser called Positive Energy, but that was also the part of how we ran the school around knowing how much power we were using, how could we make savings. So in the winter it was about, if we're running the heaters, we're shutting the doors, we're shutting the windows, and we're being mindful of what the temperature is set on the heat pumps in every classroom.
And this is not just the management team and the teachers, but the students are involved in all of these
decisions.
Correct,
yeah. And we had a team of eco buddies right across the school. Students in every classroom were sort of like the watchdogs who were making sure that windows were shut and doors were shut and all the rest of it in the winter when we're trying to warm things up. At that point, we still had about 8 classrooms that had the black heats heating their classrooms, which were really inefficient. I mean, they were efficient in terms of heat, but they used a lot of power. So we just worked through a process of replacing all of those with heat pumps in those rooms to reduce the the power usage. But really, got the students engaged in how we could actually reduce our power bill. And part of this was too, like, this is the cost of our power. I think in 1 year, going back to about 2014, it's like $35,000 was our power bill for the year. Like, that's a lot of money. And no one really thinks about it. Teachers don't think about that, because when they walk in, they turn the lights on, turn the heating on, get on with the day.
Yeah.
And kids walk in and out, the door's open, that gets pinned back, the windows are wide open, the heat's generating heat, and it's all going out the window and out the door. No one's thinking about it, because if we get cold, we'll just shut everything up and let it warm up again. Like, this is how we do it. So no one's being thoughtful, and that's just one thing. But as we started to say, well, look, how much money could we save here, and what could that mean? So if we could save $5,000 on our power bill, what would we use that for? So I guess I could say to staff, okay, here's $5,000. What, in terms of teaching and learning, what would we use that for? Oh, well, we could buy some more resources. We could, we could get another teacher aid in place. We could, whatever. We could put some more books in the library. Yeah, but if we don't make any savings, then there's no $5,000. Sort of simple as that. So even just by raising the consciousness, before we even had solar, we started to see a change. Like, I think it was 2000 before the solar was up, because it didn't go up until end of 2015. So even in 2013, my first year back, I think we might have saved about $2,000 in power, which, like, is a reasonable chunk. Wasn't really enough to do much with, but at least people could see by the efforts we could actually save. And but once the solar went up, and we went through that whole process of raising the money, because it created a massive focus on the school, because we raised just over 60 grand.
Wow.
For the through the two positive energy fundraisers over sort of 12 months. And everyone sort of got behind it. Like, the community came to the event, and that first year of me not really pushing as hard, the solar went up. We saved 5 grand, so we were like about 28,000, I think. I think my last year there, we were averaging around $25,000 for power.
Okay.
And subsequently, we were able to put in another probably 2 teacher aides into the school to work.
Which would make a massive difference too.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge, particularly you put it in at the junior end, where you capture them early. So, that was a really positive impact. But it's not just that. We did the recycling thing. We did the vegetable garden thing. So the veggie gardens are all well set up there, and ran with the Edible Gardens program supported by council.
So you won an Enviro School Award. Were those things part of
so
that
Enviro
award?
Gold School. I'm sure Renwick's still an Enviro Gold School.
Yep.
So we had a number of things in play that kept that eco focus up, and students had their own gardens at home. I mean, even though it's been going for a long time, we saw a shift in the way students treated their pet day. The gardens that they were growing in their own homes, the produce that they were able to bring, the fact they had chickens and all those sorts of things. A lot more conscious, and that's one of the real qualities of Renwick School, is it's still that sort of country influence, that rural influence on the school, which gives it a really nice flavour.
Do you think these messages are finally getting through to kids so that they'll change the way they live as an adult? Because, really it was our grandparents, parents, and our generation that sort of destroyed the planet in a lot of sense, wasn't it?
Yep.
And it's up to our kids and our grandkids to try and turn that around, but that's only going to happen, it seems to me, through programs like this.
Yep.
Are we doing enough to actually change society?
No, not enough at all. If you look at what do we need, what are human basic needs? Well, we need water. But how much water gets wasted on a daily basis? In a school environment, in a home environment, treating water as gold is really, really critical, because that is a life's, giving source. If we don't have it, what do we do? So, in treating energy, valuing what we have and protecting what we have. I always talked about, our kids being the stewards of the future. they have to understand it, they have to be able to live it, and they have to be able to, implement it, live it, and teach it so that it does sustain itself. But we're not there by a long shot. We're probably 5 years out from the planet heating up to a point where we can't go back.
I'm shocked at the amount of young people that I interact with in their 20s who just don't consider throwing plastic away. It's just get tossed in the bin without a second thought. And, I'm going, hang on, you guys are the ones that are meant to be thinking about this.
Yep. And there's still a number of schools, organisations, businesses, whatever, that don't even do recycling. I mean, you could go down a number of our streets in Blenheim and there'll be a number of houses, even though everything's provided to be able to recycle, that they don't. And they have a view that, it doesn't make any difference. What difference is it going to make if I recycle? Well, actually, it makes a whole lot of difference. What goes into the landfill, what can be repurposed, reprocessed, whatever. That makes a whole lot of difference. But there's still those attitudes out there. Yeah, and it doesn't help when you have world leaders saying similar things.
No, and that adds confusion and doubt in people's minds, doesn't it?
Yep.
Can we move on to a fantastic eco-sustainability story of Mistletoe Bay?
Oh, yeah.
So, what was the vision? Where did it start? How long ago? And, how did it get to what it is today?
Yeah.
I know it's a long story.
Yeah, it's a long story. It's probably one of the proudest things I think I've been, in my life, other than my wife and family, that I've been involved with, really. And to be honest, it started in 1982, my first year of teaching.
Wow.
When I took my first class camp out to Mistletoe Bay. And it was very basic. It was just an old farm cottage down there, the Vogel Cottage.
It was a dock site.
Or Lands and Survey then.
Yeah.
Under Lands and Surveys management. And there was the old sort of 2-bedroom batch up there called the whare, up on the hill, and behind sort of the cottage. And then sheep running around, a bit of a paddock, and so you could sort of pitch tents. And there was an old garage on part of it, and then up the top there was what they call the old caretaker's residence and the Joe house, and it was pretty. But the cottage, in spite of it being in a pretty rough state, it had a little lounge with an open fire, had a pretty basic lean-to sort of kitchen, toilet and shower at the back. And that was it. It was very basic.
Did you used to take students there for camps?
I took kids for camps, yeah. So the kids would all camp. We'd go in the summer. So they'd be in tents. In the house, there was sort of basically 3 bedrooms. So myself and the parents would stay in the house, and the tents were all around it with the kids. And, it was just, and we'd sail and kayak and, do all the things that you do, look for eels in the creek, whatever, up in the bush. Was great. Very, very basic. And it was still like that when I was there in 2002. So it's going 20 years later, when I was there as principal of Renwick's Fairhall School. Had our year 7 and 8s over there for a camp. And we're doing all the things, and the caretakers who were there and came down were just talking to me saying, we're finishing shortly, and I had the conversation with them, why is that? And they said, Doc is looking at other options for Mistletoe Bay, possibly leasing it out. And I thought, crikey, I've taken probably since 82, probably 15 camps here, each year, over the years. And I thought, and it's such a beautiful place, you're 15 minutes by boat from Picton, but you feel like you're remote and in the wilderness somewhere other than the sea, with the sea right at your feet. So my thinking was, I'd hate to lose this as a outdoor education, being very selfish, outdoor education facility for the kids in my school. I'd hate that. So when I got back into town, I rang Doc Sound's office and just asked to talk to whoever I needed to talk to about it. Ended up talking to a guy by the name of Roy Gross, who just happened to be the area manager for the Sounds for Doc, and also happened to be a guy I went to school with in Christchurch.
And a lovely guy.
Yeah, and a really cool man. And so we ended up having a chat. And then he came to see me at school and just said, look, do you want to talk about it? And I said, well, what, if someone was interested to explore, developing it into an outdoor education facility or to take it over, what would we need to do? And he said, well, present us with a proposal. So I sort of got to work quietly. I didn't really go hard at it for a start because I thought, gosh, can I do this? It's a lot of work.
You were principal at Fair Hall.
Principal at Fair Hall, yeah. So I slowly got to work and I thought, right, let's talk to my board of trustees and say, look, here's an opportunity for us to have our very own outdoor education centre, and sort of laid it all out. I mean, a number of the board members had been to Mistletoe on a camp, so they knew what I was talking about.
What was your vision at this point for it? Did you have the grandiose plans that it is now, or just an idea to secure it?
No, it was just an idea to secure it first, and then, if I had anything in the back of my mind, I had an idea of maybe, sort of constructing some huts, with say 4 bunks in each, and having a sort of a kitchen dining area, which was sort of your hub with an ablution block connected to it, sort of thing, with showers and toilets. So that was very rough early thinking. But anyway, the board, so we talked about it, left it for a couple of months, came back to it, and then having really thought about it, and thought, look, it's probably too big, too big a commitment for the board to take on. Like running the school, there's no additional funding to run something like that and own it or maintain it, whatever. So it was really, I guess, if the money was there, we'd have probably jumped at it, but financially it wouldn't have been a good decision for the board. So my next thought was, okay, I'll try and let's see if I can get the Marlborough Principals Association to agree to develop an outdoor education centre there that all schools used, and gave a presentation there. And then the sort of general thought was, principals come and go. So how would we continue to manage that? And I thought, actually, that's a really good point. Yep, it's not going to happen.
Was it all getting too hard at this point?
It was starting to get a bit hard, and then a couple of the guys on the Principals Association said, look, we'd be keen if you did want to follow through, just let us know. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll go and talk to Outward Bound. So I got in touch with Outward Bound, talked to the board chair, and ended up having a meeting out at Outward Bound with the Outward Bound board. And I just explained what I was thinking of doing and stuff like that, and would they support it? And they said, not only will we support it, here's your first board member. And it was Vic Collar.
Okay.
So I thought, right, we're going to form a trust here. That was sort of became pretty clear. And so after that, I sort of started doing the work around that. And, so long story short, formed a board, and went through the process of becoming a trust, but signed up with the charities, well, it wasn't Charities Commission then, Companies Office, as an incorporated society.
Yep.
And we had our first official meeting as a trust, as the Mistletoe Bay Trust, in January 2003.
Was that exciting?
Yeah, it was. We went over to the bay, had a bit of a look, around, and thought, well, this is the vision. And,
but I guess you knew there's a hell of a lot of hard work
to
make it.
Yeah, who would have thought? But it was 2003. And so in June 2004, we'd done enough background, presented the proposal, and negotiated a control and management agreement with DOC. And we had a big function over at Mistletoe Bay on June 6th, 2004, where DOC officially signed over to the Mistletoe Bay Trust for 10 years.
Mm.
So they gave us a 10-year window to see what we could do.
Was that a first for DOC to enter a partnership?
I think if it wasn't, it was certainly one of the early ones, because it was well supported by DOC. Like in those days, they used to have the conservator, so he attended. There was a lot of DOC representation there on that day. There was probably, about 150 people there that day for that sign-over. We had a big there was a pōwhiri, because Te Atiawa, it's their rohi, so they sort of led that ceremony. Yep. And prior to that, we'd had to have quite a few talks with Te Atiawa, because they weren't familiar with Mistletoe Bay at all, because they're so busy. So we went over, took them over, and walk them round so they could see, well, this is part of your rohi. It's been operating like this. And we sort of broke bread with them, and they were really supportive of what we were trying to do. And so when it came to that day on June 4th, they were there, really present, and they led that whole porphyry, which was great. And it was sort of them too saying, like, not just honouring the occasion, but also giving us permission to actually proceed, which was cool. So that was June 6, 2004. And then as a trust, we had to get cracking, raise some money,
to
develop
get some
plans.
Infrastructure in place.
Yeah, we didn't have any money really at that stage.
Yeah.
So I guess, we had to get on with that. So my job, I saw it essentially, was to network and raise money. So I took 6 months off my job. Took 6 months leave from my principal's job at Fairhall, and I basically networked all over the country, everywhere. Anywhere anyone would listen to me, I talked about what the vision was for Mistletoe Bay, and that was to develop an education centre where at the heart of it was growing the stewards of the future, our kids, investing in kids through 3 PO, which I already had really fixed in my mind at that point. It would be, conservation, environmental sustainability, and education to underpin that. And so a lot of people bought into that, but they still said, no, we're not giving you any money. But at the end of that 6 months, what I had secured was in cash. I think we were probably around about $100,000 in the bank.
Wow.
And I had a number of other things on the go. But, very quickly, we sort like what is now Rata Foundation, but was then Canterbury Community Trust. I met with the CEO, and he was very supportive, and their board was very supportive. I think in the end, we got about $250,000 first off with Canterbury Community Trust. So we started to build a little bit of a nest egg. We ran a couple of fundraisers. Just the fundraisers were more, not so much about raising money, but about promoting what we were doing in the Marlborough region. Yep. We ran one fundraiser called Back a Kid to Camp, or Back a Kid to the Bay. That's right, Back a Kid to the Bay, and we made bumper stickers, and there's quite a few of those around. And we didn't raise a lot. I think we made about 10 grand off that fundraiser, but the message was starting to get out there, and media was really a big friend to us, using the Marlborough Express and others that helped us get the word out.
So when did the first building get underway? I think, so we built the total funds in the bank to around about 2 million. Wow, that's impressive.
That was
Over
pretty
what
good.
period?
Yeah, I think back we got up there, and the interim we also secured pro bono architecture services and pro bono engineering services. The 2 Grahams. So Graham Savage, architect, Graham Kerrigan, engineer, they were 2 critical men in this process. Because, if they had been charging, it would have cost us. Graham, we also brought in, right at the early part, to give us sort of a picture of what it could look like from was Sir Michael Fowler.
Yeah.
So we brought him across and spent a day with him, just talking to him about the possibilities and what we're aiming for. And he came up with the concept of what you see there now.
Okay.
So he went away, and then we brought him back, and because he was an architect, but he was more of an artist.
Yeah.
And so
something a bit special.
Yeah. So he gave us that vision of what it could possibly look like, and we sort of tinkered with that, and then Graham got hold of it as our architect, and he sort of turned it into, this is how it would sit on the site and make it work. And all along, it was always going to be, this is an eco village. Vic was really a driver. Really helped drive that. we needed to make sure that if we did it right, and we always talked about it being the Rolls-Royce version. If you're going to do it once, do it right, Rolls-Royce version.
Because I can imagine it would be easy to lose the focus of the eco-village, the sustainability and the learning, and just turn it into a flash campsite.
Yeah, and look, you could sell it off. You could go and find sponsorship from the local cigarette company, or you could keep your ethics intact, which we did, all the way through.
Yeah.
So the fundraising was hard, but once we got it, it's sort of we got others to invest. So we were lucky. We also picked up, when we talk about money, some very wealthy people who saw the vision and literally gave us money. Like one individual gave us $300,000.
Incredible.
It was amazing. It was a hugely generous amount of money. So we were really
anonymously.
No, we honoured her in the name of our last building, which was the Thorburn, the Thorburn Totara room. So Wendy Thorburn, she's a lovely, lovely lady who wanted to invest in education and wanted to invest in kids and had a real passion for Mistletoe Bay. I guess because we sort of sowed that seed. So she was amazing.
Money given and from others, without any guarantee of exactly the final product and how long it's going to be like that for, and just in trust that you'll do what you say you're going to do.
We were already up and running when that money came in, but she came out to the Bay more than once. I took her in. She came to one of our AGMs. A remarkable woman who was just enormously generous with her money, but also her words of support, which was really, really good for us. So so we actually didn't start building until 2007, and at early 2007 the first thing we put in was the wastewater system. We had to get the infrastructure in place. So and that was when we put in the Kubota submerged membrane bioreactor system, which was pretty phenomenal, because we talked earlier about water being gold. Well, that was a system that everything that goes into that system, so it was going to come down the plug hole, it was going to go through the toilets, it was going to come off wherever it came through, and we could turn that water into reusable water, which is reused into every toilet system. Not drinkable, although apparently you could, but but we reused it. So it was an amazing system, very expensive, but it's still running today. But it's like anything, you've got to maintain it. You've also got to get a feel for it.
And that was used as a learning project.
That's a learning project in its own right. What happens to water out here? Like water in the sounds of anywhere is just you've got to protect it and look after it. Well, here was a great example of a sustainable way of using water. And even when we used it a second time, through the toilet systems, well, guess what? It went back through the system, and it could come back a third and a fourth and a fifth. And we weren't adding to it through, other than the shower water, and anything that went down a plug hole, well, that would add to it. Anything we couldn't use, well, then we trickle irrigated that to the bush, so we fed the bush.
So do you want to talk about the buildings and the involvement of the army, which was a pretty amazing story?
It gets lost in the fundraising. So the infrastructure went in early 2007, but at the same time the army came and met with me and gave us a golden offer of they'll come and build it for us. So this is the Engineers Regiment from Linton Camp. And I thought, this is amazing. I mean, it's going to cost us nothing other than we've got to get the materials on site and they will build it. So, how do you value this? That's probably about a $1.5 million investment right there in terms of cost. But anyway, I think about the 3rd of September 2007, 20 engineers arrived from Linton Camp. Carpenters, sparkies, plumbers, project managers, chef, you name it, they had everything. And they set up camp at Mistletoe, and 10 weeks later, we had all the whare were built, the ablution block for the camp ground was built, the kitchen, the shared kitchen facilities were built. And so it was amazing.
And they use this as a remote training exercise.
And they use it
well.
as an exercise, a training exercise. So for a week of that 10 weeks, they were in full kit, guns slung over the shoulder, climbing all over these buildings, building. There were helicopters flying in, there were boats coming in.
Pretty cool thing to be
it was
part
a
of,
pretty amazing exercise, and they were, and like just the most amazing young men and women who were there. And phenomenal gift from Linton Camp. Yeah, no, really. And it wasn't the first time they came either. I mean, they came back. That was stage 1, and they actually came back and built stage 2 for us. So that was 2007. That was built, and then in 2012 they came back and built the Thorburn Totara room, which was sort of like our classroom conference space connected to the kitchen. And they built for us our, I guess you'd call it, and a brand new camp kitchen facility, science lab, drying room, was all part of one facility. This sort of our reception shop area and workshop. And that took quite a bit longer. They were 2 big builds. They were big buildings with lots of steel work and stuff like that. But again, we raised the money, and Linton Camp came back and built it for us. So yeah, enormously grateful to the New Zealand Defence Force, particularly the Army, particularly Linton Camp. Yeah.
It seems to me that must have been an incredible exercise in logistical management on your part and the trusts. Yeah. Firstly, to have such a good response from DOC, a government bureaucracy. Yeah. And secondly, to raise all those funds and then have another government department, the Defence Force, to come and achieve Phenomenal. That for you, which was incredible, really. Phenomenal.
I mean, so I sort of roll this is sort of what staggers me the most, is we signed the Control and Management Agreement on June 6th, 2004. And then on the same date, 4 years later, we had our official opening.
Wow.
With, our then patrons, Stephen and Margaret Tyndall. Yeah. 350 guests in this massive marquee. We boated them all over. We presented, all the speeches, all the formalities. We fed them. There was plenty to drink. It was the most amazing day. It was phenomenal. With everyone represented, the Army were there, the government was there, the Minister for Conservation was there.
And then the outcomes over the years have been what you originally hoped for? Yeah,
look, honestly, we kicked into gear so quickly. Once we opened, schools came, and very quickly we were seeing over 2,500 students a year coming through. We had at one point 64 schools coming in a year for their outdoor education. And on top of that, to balance it, so the education side of things was really humming along. On the balance side, the commercial side, where we had public and others who wanted to use the facilities, they pay more. So by the general public and the various organisations who use the facilities, they paid more, which in effect subsidised the education program. So students, it was $10 a night to stay in the whare. But if it was a commercial user or family who wanted to come in for a weekend and stay there, well then they would pay a market rate to have like a motel unit. Yeah. And that's how we were able to keep the price so low for students. So that was been a really effective model. Yep. Going forward. I mean, and as we got momentum, other people got involved. We set up. We had our patrons, Sir Stephen and Lady Margaret Tyndall. We had our vice patrons, who was a group of 10 other people who were just keen to support us in any other way. And through them and their network, we were able to attract other support. So, for example, our floating pontoon. and the link span linking to the jetty was completely donated, $100,000 worth of investment just there. Bruce and Jesse Pullman from Heb Contractors, like out of the blue, a short 2-line email, and yes, we'll fund that for you, just like that. Phenomenal. So the Bay really started to take shape, and the education outcomes, I was seeing them through Renwick, because our 10 senior classes all went to Mistletoe Bay on a cycle over 10 weeks, and I attended every camp to make sure they did. And the kids, they just loved it. They just love it, and they'd walk into the whare, the accommodation units, and go, oh wow, these are amazing, because they're lovely, comfortable, nicely laid out accommodation, not just a hut for kids.
And what sort of learning programs were in place?
So we had the aquatic program, so sailing program, kayaking. In the summer, definitely some other sort of like snorkeling type stuff with kids, but mainly and also just shore study, beach study stuff, stream study, bush study. There's the physical side of things, so sort of leadership stuff, challenge activities where they work in groups to solve a problem with ropes and make a rope bridge between 2 trees, whatever. But also service. So I always made sure that when students had a really good time on their 3 days of camp, that the last 2 hours of their program was giving back, so that they actually had a service element. So that might be planting some shrubs, trees around the place, tidying up, making sure they've left it better than they found it. Always checking the beach, because that's an area where things change every day with the tide, making sure that that's tidy and clean. Anything that they could do for the bay, like washing down some of the boats, whatever, there was always a service element. I think that's really important, that you can have all this fun, but you've also got to make sure you give back. But the learning was really powerful. When the kids came back, they're just full of it. Absolutely
they'd
full
just
of
be
it.
buzzing.
Yeah, they love it. Mistletoe Bay delivers on the learning, there's no question. Like, honestly, without even having the kayaks and all those other things there's so much learning that can be had just by walking up into the bush and sitting quietly and waiting and observing and seeing what's going on, listening to the creek. So the other sort of learning themes we started to get into was science themes, art themes, just creative writing themes. I took a camp there for reading, just get lost in the bush and read. The
possibilities would be endless, wouldn't they?
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah. So you started up a foundation.
Yep. So what we found sort of 2 years in, so around about 2000, so what was that, 2004, about 2006, that in my conversations with principals whose schools were going to Mistletoe, there was a sort of a growing number, excuse me, of families who found the cost to send their children on, extracurricular type activities like camp was getting pretty hard for them to meet that cost. And so I talked to Stephen and Margaret about that, our patrons, and so they immediately said, look, let's try this. So they gave us $5,000 as a trust and said, see what the demand is. Well, I think within 6 months we'd allocated that. Like, when we let schools know that they're taking their kids over, if there's any problems there, let us know. And we set them up as a camp scholarship. So it wasn't like we're handing out charity here. These are kids who really deserve to go, who will get enormous benefit from being there, and should not be deprived that opportunity. And that was sort of a loose criteria that we gave to principals, because at the end of the day, principals would advocate on behalf of those families, and particularly those children, those students. So we gave out those in the form of camp scholarships, and we recognised it with a really nice certificate for the child and a letter saying, congratulations, you have been awarded this Mistletoe Bay camp scholarship to attend this camp. And so, it was really seen as an award.
Yeah.
And like I got a phone call from a mum from a school where she had twins that we had funded both of them, and she was in tears. Just so grateful. And like when you have that sort of response, you're definitely doing the right thing. two, that there's real value in what we are doing as a trust to provide these opportunities for students, because that's what, that's how deeply the parent felt about it. And all we asked for in return was that there was some acknowledgement. So from the school, might put a note in the newsletter saying that the Mistletoe Trust through the foundation have been able to award so many scholarships, and a short letter after the camp from the student, or the mum and dad and the student, just saying thanks. That's all we've asked for. We didn't ask for anything more. And we've had some pretty cool letters from students over the years, and nice photos and things like that.
It would all make it worth it.
Yeah. But of course, that $5,000 went out. Stephen and Margaret put in another $5,000, but I thought we just can't keep going back to our patrons. Yeah. So in 2016, we set up the Mistletoe Charitable Foundation. And at that point, actually 2015, at that point, I realised that whilst I'm chair of the Mistletoe Bay Trust, but I'm now chair of the Mistletoe Charitable Foundation, so one hand's going to feed the other hand. I needed to create some separation. So as tough as it was, and I even talked to my family, because my children grew up with everything Mistletoe Bay, and my wife Jan was an amazing support all throughout that. So there a lot of skin in the game. Yeah. So it took me a while, and I talked to them a lot about whether I should give up the chair of Mistletoe Bay Trust, and so I did. I gave that away, and
I suppose there's the concern: is it going to continue with the vision that you had?
Yeah, well, that's and that is that's a massive massive concern, because I don't want Mistletoe Bay to disappear. I want it to be there in 50, 100 years, but living by those same three PO. Conservation, environmental sustainability, underpinned by great education. But the foundation, we set to work, and it was a lot of hard work. Raising money's hard.
You seem to be pretty good at it, though.
Oh yeah, but I think I've raised enough for the time. But we set a goal of raising $500,000, and we raised just under 400,000. And actually, I think we all got a little bit, we're a bit fatigued, so we thought, that'll do. So we've had that invested now for, when did we set that investment up? About 4 years ago, and so that's generating revenue, and that revenue we aim to hand over to the Mistletoe Bay Trust to then award out in scholarships, as camp scholarships for students. I think I was talking to the foundation just at our last meeting that we do need to probably have another fundraising sort of campaign, but that we don't touch the principal. So the principal fund is sitting invested, and it's only the revenue generated by that's allocated. And we do keep a little bit of money aside for operations of the foundation. But yeah, I'm really, really pleased with what that's achieved.
It's a fantastic story.
Yeah, no, it's really good. But I'm in that process now. Like I effectively did 20 years on the Mistletoe Bay Trust before I stood down. And I'm now, I've stood down as chair of the foundation, and I've stayed on another year to support the new chair, who's doing an amazing job. And so I'll step aside at this AGM. But the foundation have asked me to be their patron, so I think, I'm never really stepping away. I'm just going to be in the shadows a little bit, which is kind of nice.
Maybe they want you to donate $5,000 every year.
Yeah, well, I'll always help, because I can't help it, because mistletoe's in my DNA. Yeah. It's just part of who I am, and I love it.
No, it's very, very impressive.
And to be honest, Craig, I've seen lives change out there, and kids, and it only takes one to change that just does it all. Like, I've got to share this story because it's so funny. That, like, we developed a partnership with Save the Children for over a 4-year period, and Save the Children New Zealand would bring about 16 young people, sort of 15, 16-year-olds, to Mistletoe Bay on the holiday break, and I'd go over and help run the holiday program with these kids, and they came from everywhere, from South Auckland to Invercargill. This particular year, there was this young boy, and honestly, I wish I could remember his name, but I can't remember his name. He was 15, from Manurewa. Before he came to Mistletoe, he'd never left Manurewa. He'd never seen the sea. He'd never been in a plane. He'd never been in a boat. And he'd never been in the South Island.
All the things we take for granted.
Yeah. So this boy was plucked out of Manurewa, flew to Wellington, flew to Blenheim, so first time in a plane, 2 trips, came across in a boat from Picton to Mistletoe, first time in a boat, and first time in the South Island and to Mistletoe Bay. And he's one of these kids you could hear everywhere. Like, he was full of it. He's so taking it all in. And this particular day, so he'd been there a day, and I'm over there and I'm taking him for sailing. Now, he's quite a big boy. He's 15 years old, but he's probably 6 foot tall, and he's probably 90 kilos. He's a big solid lad. And anyway, I get a life jacket on him, get him into this Optimus yacht, and of course, Optimus yacht's not necessarily built for boys his way. Anyway, he's got it on a bit of an angle, but he's getting sailing, and when he's moving, like, you could just hear him all over the bay. He's cheering and yelling. It's just, next thing he capsizes, and he's in the water, and you can hear him. He's not worried. He's just, he's yelling. So I shoot over the rescue boat, help him to get it upright, get him into the boat, bail it out, and away he goes again. And like, I couldn't get him off the water. We're talking, this is July. This is July school holidays. The water's probably 15 degrees.
Yeah.
He's saturated, and he's been out there for like 2.5 hours, and he just won't come in. And in the end, I said, look, it's going to get dark soon, mate. We need to bring you in. So he comes in, and he gets off the boat. He's absolutely saturated. He comes and wraps his arms around me, and he says, oh, you're my bro.
Wow.
And he says, I just love it out there. Can I do it again tomorrow?
Wow, that's
this is
nice,
a kid.
isn't it?
And yeah, awesome kid. Life-changing.
Have you stayed in touch with him at all?
No, I haven't. Because we sort of had to keep, like, you got it. But I could get back in touch with him through Save the Children, I'm sure. But he'll be 20 something now.
Yeah.
But I'm just hoping that for him, that opened his eyes to a much bigger world of opportunity for him.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Well
very
done.
cool.
That's fantastic.
But I like to think there's lots of examples like that have come out of Mistletoe from lots of other schools that have been there.
I'm sure there is, and you just haven't had the personal involvement.
No, they're cool.
Yeah,
super cool.
Can we take a slightly different tack? Just interested in programs that are additions to the MOE syllabus, taken up by some schools, probably not by others, such as Kiwi Can.
Oh, yeah.
And I read in an article that you said that Kiwi Can is the single biggest investment we've made at Renwick School. And it comes back to how we train kids in today's society and all the challenges that society brings with respect and division and social media and integrity. So how important are external programs like that, and how disadvantaged are some schools that maybe don't have them or can't afford them? Or
we're extraordinarily lucky. I mean, on one hand, like the Graham Dingle Foundation, which Kiwi Can's runs through, like, doing an exceptional job, no question. My question is, it's sad that we need the likes of Kiwi Can. Society has got to a point where we need external providers to teach our kids values because it's not happening elsewhere. Like, personally, deeply, I feel the prerogative of teaching values, reinforcing values, and all the rest of it, that sits with mum and dad, and that sits in the home. But unfortunately, because of the nature of our society and all the pressures and demands that now come on mums and dads, and all the other influences, the various media platforms that kids are exposed to, and just all of those colliding has created this need for such a strong program like Kiwi Can to come into our schools. So, answer to your first question, that values program coming in impacted on every single child at Renwick every week for 40 weeks of the year. And then we brought that, I'm trying to think what year we started. It must have been about 2017, I think. And it's still there because, one, the need is there, but also it's a really engaging program and the kids love it, and they're learning a lot of other stuff as well. So it's not so much we're talking about respect, it's actually the program and the activities which demand respect without actually saying the word.
Yeah.
And so that's what's sort of implicit within everything. And that's what's really cool about the program. The other thing that I was really keen to do was bring young positive, role models in front of the students, no matter what age they were. And that's what Kiwi Can provides, really engaging young, well-trained people to come in on a less, they're not in that formal space as a teacher, so they have a different relationship with the students, and it's really cool.
But they demand a respect because of who they are,
yeah,
or what
and the
they've
program
done,
they run, and all the rest of it. And
is that program free of charge?
No.
I think schools have to find funding for it.
Yeah. So what we did when I was there at Renwick, we signed up to the fee program that the government's paying out. So instead of parents paying school fees, the government pays them. So that's how Renwick pays for it.
Right.
Out of that.
Should those values that are being taught by Kiwi Can, should they be part of the mainstream syllabus? Or can it not be done as well?
Well, it depends where you want things to lie. I mean, like they are, because schools, as I was saying earlier, schools hold those middle ground values. They sit there, keep trying to keep a common sense approach to everything. We've had families with way different values from what we espouse, but they accept that the school's here, and when they're in home, that's how they behave, or act and behave. But at school, like at school, it's not okay to swear. It's not okay to swear at each other, and it's not okay to swear at adults. It might be okay here, but it ain't okay here, and that's one clash that happens quite often.
Yeah.
And there are other things that families might live and breathe and do in their in terms of their beliefs about different cultures and stuff. But at school, that's not okay. So if schools were to go down that path, it's a really tricky space to be in.
Yeah.
And I fundamentally, I think, we've got to do something about society. I mean, I know schools have access to just about every student in the country, but actually we need to support our parents more to be good parents.
Which is bigger than any school, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
goes far beyond that.
And the pressures on parents these days, and we've become so Western, we've become so money-oriented and, capitalistic. When I was a kid, you could walk down the street that I lived in and knock on a door, and an adult would answer every door because, a mum or a dad was at home and the spouse was out making the living. Well, that's not the case now. Most houses will be locked up, be no one there until the end of the workday. So life has really changed.
What changes in society, or rephrase the question, what issues are schools and teachers facing today due to societal changes that weren't around when you started?
Depression, students with high levels of depression, anxiety, kids on the spectrum that they were there, but not the extremes that we're now seeing. And with those anxiety levels, with those depression levels, with those autistic spectrum levels, we're getting some pretty bizarre behaviours coming through school gates, which, when you add all that up and put it in a classroom with 29, 30 other kids, and you're expecting a child who's feeling highly anxious or deeply depressed or, a concoction of whatever, to then sit down and be quiet and learn, or to work in a quarterly nicely with other students, they just don't have the ability to do that, or to be able to regulate their own response, their own behaviours in that space.
When did all this start happening? And, with a much higher degree of...
I would say I started really noticing it probably around about 2012, 2013. There was sort of like there was a shift.
Any idea what's causing it?
I would think children access to internet, access to sites that are not applicable to them, Facebook and similar media platforms create all sorts of issues. Like I was talking before about, a kid might put something up and they're looking for likes and they don't get any likes. That's a cause for depression. Whereas, they haven't got the resilience, the ability to be able to handle that. Well, just what you put up wasn't really interesting to anybody, so it's not that people don't like you; it's just they're not interested.
Yeah.
So there's that maturity that's not there to handle a lot of the stuff that they've been given.
But
like
it's part of society. We can't take it away. Because
no,
it's not
I mean,
happen,
we used to call parents liars, when they allowed their children to be on Facebook. When we had no child in the school old enough to be on Facebook. According to the Facebook criteria, you had to be 14 years. So, we don't have any 14-year-olds. The number of... We did some pretty, drastic stuff, but we had an IT sort of forensic type guy come into the school and went right through, talked to every kid, and we had 6 and 7-year-olds watching Grand Theft Auto, which is, I think, an R16 or an R18 piece of software. Because it's got some pretty awful stuff on it. 6 and 7-year-olds don't have the brain capacity to process that and go, oh, that's just that. So they see it as real. So yeah, we in many ways, parents need a lot more support to be able to parent, I guess.
Where's that going to come from? Do you think
Exactly.
Do you think change is actually going to happen? And what change is required?
Yeah, I know. I mean, you also, compounding with this was the pandemic and things like lockdowns, fear, everything that happened around that has just compounded it and made it even worse, really. So look, I don't know if you can legislate. I just don't know what that would look like. I think though that it's time for education as a whole to be flipped and be thought about be done differently in this country, be thought about differently. I think we've got a bureaucracy that has got way too heavy, and not enough of that money that's going to bureaucracy going into schools themselves. Now we talk about the quality of the teacher has the most impact on a child, and that is absolutely right. And there are different, experts, education experts and research that suggests that you can have a class of 50 kids, but that teacher is extreme quality, they'll get great outcomes for those, 50 kids. And I agree, but not now, because within that 50 kids now, you'll have 5, 6, 7, 8 that are high, maybe more, high anxiety, high depression level, deep depression. They're not going to cope. They're not, and so they will react in different ways to the learning situation they're placed in, which will disrupt. So we hear now teachers are calling for smaller classes, and I totally agree. They need less in front of them so they can get the impact that we want, the outcomes that we want for our kids. So look, I think there's an opportunity for New Zealand to really look at its education system and reshape it in a future-focused way to take us forward. I think tomorrow's schools and the absolute shape of that needs to be reconfigured. Is
there work underway to start these changes?
Well, there was back in 2018 when a complete review was done of tomorrow's schools by there was a task force working closely with a advisory panel, and some great work was done, like really great work was done, and a report was prepared, which, okay, not everybody agreed with everything, but actually, if you take those few bits out, there were some real gems in there to be able to transform the education system. But that really hasn't happened. We're fixated on flash buildings and schools rather than a flash system.
Yeah,
I think we've got to change it around a bit. Yeah.
Another thing you mentioned in your 2019 sabbatical report, equity, excellence and belonging is much more evident in New Zealand context, driven in part by a cultural diversity and genuine focus on inclusivity. Yeah. Is there an equity and learning gap between Māori and between Māori, Pacifica and European students in New Zealand?
Yes.
And why?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
I didn't really start to identify as Māori in a big way until I was well into my teaching career, when I actually thought, I've got something here that no one else has got in this place. and maybe I can use that. And I certainly have in terms of being able to think about education differently. And that, I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons why, you know, like I, as principal of Renwick School, when I was approached by Omaka Marae to consider supporting the development of a bilingual unit there, and that would we work closely with them as Renwick School to them to become a satellite of us, I couldn't have moved fast enough. Absolutely. And so, you know, back in 2017, started with 17 tamariki there at Te Pāwānanga, based at Omaka Marae. Now there's 58 tamariki there, learning and getting their education in a Māori medium context.
As a full-time program, or
as a full-time program, yeah. So they're all based there at Omaka in Te Pāwānanga, and so we've got a long way to go. But there's some great stuff going across the country. You know, like there's Kura Kaupapa, we've got Koangareo, Kura Kaupapa, there's Kura Ana Iwi programs. I think I've got that right. But the real depth is happening in the North Island, not so much in the South, although there's some really good stuff, you know, in I think one in Nelson, there's 4 or 5 in Christchurch, Dunedin and Invercargill, but still a lot more to be done.
Does this have potential to create more division in society by splitting up Pākehā and Māori and you know, where they learn as kids?
Oh, it's not so much splitting it up. You know, if a Pākehā student wants to learn Te Reo Māori in a bilingual context, then they can enrol at Te Pāwānanga. But up until 2017, there was no choice for our Māori students. They all had to enrol in every mainstream school in Marlborough.
Yeah.
So now there's a choice. So not every Māori student in Marlborough is going to Te Pāwānanga. Those who want that choice are going there, in their whānau are wanting it, so they're attending there. And it is different, there's no question. You know, it's very different. And you know, you see that in the faces of the students, and you see that in the way they express their learning and the opportunities that they're getting. It is different. But that doesn't mean that can't be embraced in a mainstream setting, and it is, you know, in a number of places. And it's just building that capacity within the teaching profession to be, because what's good for Māori is good for everybody.
Yeah.
Just like what's good for a dyslexic student is good for everybody. If we're able to teach really well to our dyslexic students and really well to our autistic students, that's good for every kid. Just like being, you know, what's good for Pacifica. If we can do that well, that's going to benefit all our kids as well.
I think this is something that, as a Pākehā who's had no involvement in Māori culture or te reo at all in my life, because it wasn't part of life when I was at school.
Yeah.
As I get older, it's only really becoming apparent how important this is. And if you are Māori, how important that culture is, and learning it and being brought up with it. And it really came home to me. We watched that New Zealand movie Cousins. Yeah. And that was super powerful to me. Yeah. And all of a sudden I realised, you know, what it means. Yeah. Well, I probably didn't realise, but it helped. Yeah. And I can see how programs like this would just make such a difference if that's who you are as a person, and you're, even in today's society, being told, well, we don't want you to be like that, you know. And I think something you said by people in the Te Pāwānanga, they're not having to take their Māori off, leave it at the gate and walk into the school and pick it up on the way out. They're Māori all day long, and that's just great to see. Yeah. Yeah, and comfortable in their identity. I mean, like, you look at me, and I can walk in two worlds easily because I don't look Māori. You know, I'm not really brown skinned, and yet my brother is, and my sister is. So as a family, when we walk down the street as kids, particularly in Christchurch, we got told to go back to Wellington where the rest of the bungas were. Wow.
you know. So even with me, I've experienced racism in a really direct, you know, awful, confronting, you know, context, and it is the most. It fills you with anger and powerlessness because you can't change who you are. I mean, you know, and this is just people judging you on the colour of your skin. I had someone say to me a wee while ago, you know, why do we need Te Reo Māori? There's no other country, you know, in the world that speaks Maori. That's what they're Maori. And I said, well, why don't you go and talk to Samoa and Fiji and Tonga then? Because there's nowhere else in the world where they speak Samoan except Samoa. And there's Fijian and Fiji and Tongan and Tonga. So their language is important to them. Why shouldn't it be to Māori?
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I had another person say to me the other day, I couldn't believe this, who said, I was really interested in learning Māori, but I decided not because it's just in your face, on the news, everywhere at the moment. I said, it's just got my back up. I just don't like hearing it anymore. And I said, well, why don't you switch shoes? And what do you mean? I said, why don't you put your feet inside some Māori shoes and roll the clock back 180 years when the only language of this country was Te Reo Māori, and then all these white fellas started arriving and speaking English. How did Māori respond to that? Like, how would they feel if all these sound bites of English that they'd never heard before and having to pick up on and learn what it means, and then, you know, and breaking down their own language? And they had to say, oh, I never really thought about it like that.
What makes a school great? I remember when our kids started at Renwick, and it was an okay school, but it was nothing special. And over the years, you know, due to a lot of the initiatives that you've spoken about, it's become visually an amazing school. I don't know what the definition of a great school is, but what makes a great school compared to one that just ticks the boxes, meets the minimum criteria, and how much is the leadership of the principal part of all of that?
Look, honestly, it's a community that makes a school great. But I think that what happens if you can, it's like galvanizing everybody around a cause. So, you know, where are we going? What's important here? How do we hold each other to account to that? And agreeing on all those things. And everybody has a say. So I think, you know, like one of the things that Renwick, that stood out for me in my time at Renwick, is that when I talked to the kids about what was important to them, they knew and they were able to tell me. And that's how that vision statement came up around learning a strength, be the best you can be.
Yeah.
Because learning a strength was already there. And I talked to the students about what does that mean, you know, and they, like, you know, 350 kids at the time, they all had different definitions of it, but none of them talked about muscles, like strength and muscles. No, because I'd say, no, it's nothing about that. You know, like learning, it's about learning, you know, it's being strong in your learning. So they all had an idea. And I said, well, look, this has been on your school logo, as far as I can see, since 1861, when it first opened, like when there was only like 20 students in the school. I said, is it still important? And I said, you don't have to answer me now. Go away and think about that. Talk about it as a class amongst yourselves, and I'll be meeting with you again. So, because I meet with every class to sort of find out. And I think the thing that came back to me from them, even these kids, like 1861, like that's like, they can't even comprehend that.
Yeah.
But they all said, yes, Mr. Heath, that's important here. Okay, so if we've got to keep that. They go, yes. Okay, so what's the heartbeat? So that was then, and you're saying it is now, but what's the heartbeat of your school? What makes you come to school every day? What gets you out of bed? You know, that sort of stuff. And they tossed ideas around, but I can't even remember exactly how they came to it, but generally they came to, we come here to be the best. And then and someone added in, I can't remember who, you know, like, we can be, yeah. So that's what it became. Learning a strength, be the best we can be. So then we started to unpack that. So if that's our vision, that's what it is. What does that look like for a Renwick student? What does that look like for a Renwick teacher? What does that look like for a Renwick school? And so that's when they started talking about things like, well, we don't actually like the colour of our school. Because I think you might remember it was sort of like a grey. And it was like pretty ugly. Okay, well, that's cool. Let's make a note. You don't like the colour of your school. So if it was the best it could be, what would it look like? And they go, oh, heaps of colours. Okay, well, we'll come back to that. But, what we did was when we painted the school and we got the contractors in, they said, so what colour do you want? And I said, well, this is what the kids want. And I gave them about 30 different colours. And I said, do the best you can out of that. And that's when they said they had no idea. So I went back. You might remember Justin, the architect who was doing all our design work. And I said to her, so we sat down and I said, look, the kids want all these colours. How could we incorporate that into the actual design so that we actually have a design colour palette for the school? So it goes with the way the buildings are built, and no matter what building is built, they all reflect that. And so, of course, that's why we got all these colours.
Yeah, and it looks amazing.
But it does, because it makes it look like a school.
And that's where that came from the kids.
And so it's like kids saying that they had a voice, that when they said something they wanted and it actually happened, that sort of was galvanising. And so, like the call was, be the best you can be. So no matter where you are today, tomorrow you'll be better because you've had a day's learning today, which means you're better tomorrow and every day. So if this is the best that you can write today in terms of your creative writing, man, you're going to be amazing tomorrow, and then you're going to be even more amazing and so on. And it just keeps that self-belief and commitment to, but also be able to talk to each other about it. So, very quickly, we got to be able to do some really sexy things in the school, like completely redesign the senior block of classrooms and open them up and just give space and importance to the senior students. So they felt like they had some level of stature in the school because now they have the biggest spaces, really attractive spaces, interactive with IT that they could enter. So I guess it was a cool time. Yeah. But student voice, staff voice, community voice, galvanising that, and then doing what we say we're going to do. Yeah.
And what I'm sort of getting from that is you as the principal or the leader is listening to others and sort of facilitate.
Yeah.
So what makes a good leader?
I think knowing that you've got a whole bunch of leaders around you, like teachers are leaders, your board of trustees are leaders, they've been put there for a reason to lead. Your students they're leaders. You've got to let everybody lead, I guess. One of the best definitions of leadership that I've sort of tried to live by was, and it was a guy by the name of Thomas Sugiovanni who wrote this book, The Reflective Practice of Principalship. And he describes leadership as getting a giant amoeba from one side of the street to the other, and that you're pushing there, you're prodding here, you're supporting here, you're stopping for collapsing here. Like it's a constant interaction of leadership, and no one interaction is the same because there's a whole variety of needs. You've got to push here because this part needs pushing, but then you've got to go and support this bit here because they're going to collapse, and you've got to prod there and to me, that's what leadership's all about. There's no perfect. And I think the one thing that I did learn early on in my career watching others is that you have to be yourself. Like, don't try and be anyone else. Because you've heard this amazing inspirational speaker speak on leadership, don't try and be that person and that don't be them. You have to be you, because that's all you can be. You're authentic you. So if it's a good laugh out loud. If it's pretty serious, well, bring the serious face. But it's challenging. It's amazing. It's it's a really cool space to be in.
Yeah.
I look at 40 years of being in schools and 27 years of principalship. I loved every minute of it.
How do you bring a team with you to your vision?
Actually, they do the work. And when I say that, they do the work to arrive at the vision. All you do as a leader is you facilitate that and challenge. Facilitate, challenge, question, influence. That's the best way to lead. Is the best ideas come from within, not from someone who says, I have all the ideas. So, like the teaching staff, let's say take the teaching staff at Renwick School. I mean, there is a profile of teaching experience there from 35 years plus to 2 years and all in between. And their life experiences, their teaching experiences, their leadership experiences, all that compounded is a rich, fertile ground for drawing out which direction you head in. And so when ideas come to the surface, allow them to be discussed and either dismissed or developed and thought about further, and that's where the great stuff comes from. Well, I know when we wrote the curriculum for Renwick, I didn't write it. Who's in charge of science here? Oh, that's Janelle. Right, Janelle, who would you like to work with? Oh, I'd like to work. Okay, right, I'm releasing you for 2 days, and you're going away to start drafting the science curriculum. And here's the terms of reference. And the terms of reference was nothing about what science was. The terms of reference was giving them a structure to help plan themselves out. And after 2 days, they'd come back and say, we don't know what we're doing. I says, great, you're in the perfect space. What do you mean? I say, because in 2 months' time, I'm going to give you another 2 days off. You have 2 months to think about what you don't know. And then they came back 2 months later, they had their 2 days, and boom, they cooked with gas because they'd been disrupted. 2 months to think about it, and then they firmed up, and then they created these really rich curriculum. And I did that right across the board. I didn't write one element of the curriculum. The teaching staff did it. Why? Because they're the ones who've got to deliver it. They're the ones who've got to make it work. My job is, once it's written, understood, and the professional development is there to support it, to make sure everybody, can deliver it with confidence. My job is to hold them to account for delivering what they say and believe is the right way to do it. So it's utilising the expertise you have.
And on a similar note to that, one thing that comes across very strongly when reading about your career is you're big on striving for excellence, and you're a hater of mediocrity.
Yep.
What does that mean?
When you're talking about education, our kids have no choice who their teacher is. They have no choice who their principal is, and therefore it is the responsibility of the principal and the teacher to bring their A game every day, because they're getting paid to do that work. And I know teaching is a really tough game, but if you're not tough enough, then you shouldn't be in it. If you're not up to it, then you shouldn't be in it. I did my time on the Education Council, sat on the Teacher Disciplinary Tribunal, sat on a variety of competency cases of teachers, and teachers were rightfully being brought to council for either censure or striking off the register because they should not be in front of kids. So kids deserve the best. We come right back to be the best you can be. When a teacher walks in the door, the kids don't want someone who's, going to fly off the handle at the smallest thing. They need someone who's very even, very clear, and very well prepared to deliver the very best to those students, engage them and grow them and support them and nurture them in their learning. And so that the child feels safe, secure, and happy. If mediocrity is allowed to creep into the classroom, which it does in a number of classrooms in this country, allowed to creep into the school, which it does in a number of schools in this country, then who are the losers? It's our kids. And our kids are our future. And if we fail them as adults, then we get what we deserve. And frankly, I don't want that. Our kids are these empty vessels waiting to be filled up through their own efforts of seeking and being curious and critical of what's in front of them, and also the opportunities that teachers can curate around them to open their minds and inspire them. So we have an enormous responsibility, because teachers and principals and schools are nation builders. They build our nation.
Yeah, it's very true.
So that's a really serious role. So if you're not up for it, don't go into it.
We've got 2 more questions, and your last comment really touches on the first one. Why should young people finishing high school consider a teaching career? And as you mentioned earlier on, there's a lot of negative publicity.
Yeah.
There seems to be constant pay issues and compliance and behavioural issues and reasons not to do it.
Yeah.
What are the reasons that they should do it?
If they have a passion for making, and this sounds so cliche, but if they have a passion for really making a difference to the lives of kids, and then they've got something genuine to give. And money isn't an issue, because if money's an issue, then go and do something else, And money isn't an issue, then get into teaching. Like, teaching is hugely fulfilling. I mean, like when I was in the classroom, I loved it. Like, honestly, I loved it. I trained to be a teacher. I didn't train to be a principal. I didn't train to be a DP. I trained to be a teacher. In the classroom, man, you can have a lot of fun, and you're working, and they actually pay you for it, but yeah, like, when you've got 30 different kids walking through the classroom door at the beginning of the day with 30 different stories about what's happened to them in the last 18 hours, that is amazing just to grab hold of on its own. When you combine these kids, and you might grab one of those experiences from one of those kids to say, look, tell us more about that. And that could be the day. That could be your day of fun. It might have been just something funny that happened to that kid that they tell you about. And then all throughout that day, there'll be references made, and everyone will laugh because it's a shared joke. As little as that to being, this kid saw something on the way home last night. They saw a car accident or whatever. And we go, well, what happened? Was anyone hurt? What car was it? And all of a sudden, your whole day can be the writings about what happens in car accidents and who helps and who supports. Yeah. The reading can be about, let's find that news. Is there a newspaper article? Can we find a newspaper article about a car accident? How did the police investigate? What does the reporter say? All that sort of stuff. What about the maths and that? So how fast was the car going? How much damage? What will the cost be? So you can all of a sudden you can build a whole day.
It's exciting
around that. Yeah, so because it's relevant.
Yeah.
Honestly, teaching is the most amazing thing to be in. But you have to want it. You have to be passionate about it. You cannot get by without being passionate. You cannot be just oiled and greased and stuck in a cupboard and then come out and robotically go through your day. You have to bring yourself every day.
Which brings me to question 2, which you've just answered. So, what gets you excited and motivated and fizzing about your job? And it's pretty clear.
Yeah. Look, kids are amazing. Like, they're amazing surprise packages, and they will surprise you every day. All you've got to do is loosen up. Don't be too hard on kids, and show that you trust them. Because when you trust them, and they know that they feel trusted, and that you trust them, that's when you get the most magic stuff emanating in your classroom from those kids. And that's from no matter what age. 5 years as new entrants, right through my experience to 13-year-olds as year 8s graduating. My goal was always, at the beginning of a year, I'd say to my kids, my goal, and they will look at me strangely, for us as a class, and include myself in it, is that at the end of the year, on the last day, none of us want to leave. That's my goal. But today we're all new to each other, so we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of learning to do. And these are the rules, and this is how we're going to go about it, that sort of stuff. And they go, okay. But at the end of the year, without fail, it was always a pretty sad moment for all of us as we signed off and knew that this was the last time we would be together like this. Because I used to say that to them, I laid on thick. You might have heard me in Mabel Tasman when we had all those year 8s together in the room on that last night, and I say, you know what? This is the last time you guys will be in this sort of environment together ever again. You're going to head off in so many different directions. You're going to go to your colleges, but you're going to be heading in so many different directions, and life's going to have all sorts of turns and twists for you, but we will never, ever be together again like this. And then they all cry. But, they get it, because that's what we've got to help kids to treasure the moments that they have and the opportunities they have and the friendships and the connections they have. because they're invaluable in life, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That's fantastic. Your passion is infectious. And one of the things that comes across doing these interviews is that people's passions for whatever career they're in is infectious. And, you know, a lot of things that I'm finding people are saying is whatever you do in life, do it with everything you've got.
Yeah.
If you can't work out what to do, just pick something and give it everything. And it's very clear that that's what you've done and what you do. So
thanks, Craig.
Thanks for talking to me. And
it's been a pleasure.